Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jess Posgate, Projects Coordinator with OurDigitalWorld, a not-for-profit organization that encourages and supports building sustainable community and local history collections for online access. Our panel today is Angele Barnett, Adult Services Library Technician at Newmarket Public Library, Shawnee Hayward, Reference Librarian with Kawartha Lakes Public Library, and Sara Thompson, Library Associate at Halton Hills Public Library. A little background about our presentation and the project. With the early days of the pandemic and everyone switching to work from home, we at OurDigitalWorld saw a real uptick in focus on digital collection building in the GLAM sector. As well, we realized that we are collectively experiencing a unique event, and this is an opportunity to capture today's experiences as a real-time collection building exercise in the local history timeline. One of OurDigitalWorld's services is the Vita Digital Toolkit. It's a web-based toolkit for creating and displaying digital collections for online discovery and public access. The Vita Toolkit includes a contribution module, a module that's ideal for capturing community collections as part of any client's local history collections. It accepts image files, and the public can also tell their stories. Contributors agree to the terms of use, which is an attribution, non-commercial, share-alike Creative Commons license. The intake form that they fill in includes structured fields for capturing metadata, like a title, description, and geolocations. Contributions are then monitored upon submission, and the contribution, as well as the name of the contributor, can be made public or not, according to the contributor's wishes. Extra metadata can then be added by the Vita client, and the contribution item becomes part of a group for display in the larger local history collections. It is this module that has been used by many clients to invite community contributions about their COVID-19 experiences. Our speakers today are here to talk about undertaking projects at their libraries to invite public contributions about their pandemic experience and to build a current collection around the effects of COVID-19 on their communities. We'll talk about setting up the projects, publicizing and marketing the idea to the community, user uptake, obstacles to the projects, and possible future projects with the contributed collection material. The challenge for all of us as speakers and as listeners is one that affected the Capturing COVID projects: fatigue. We're all exhausted by the sustained effects of the pandemic, but when you consider even what has changed over the last 9 to 10 months, it helps to realize how quickly we forget the details and the importance of recording our current history. So with that, please join me in welcoming Angele, Shawnee, and Sara.
Thank you. I'm Angele from Newmarket Public Library. At the beginning of the pandemic, it became clear we were living through an historic event. Libraries, archives, and municipalities were setting up sites for the public to share their stories and photographs. It was understood that we had to organize a collection for our communities. I had received an email from ODW in early April using Vita to document COVID-19 in your community. So how would that look? What type of collection? How to get contributions? This is the first user contribution collection for both Newmarket and Kawartha Lakes libraries. Halton Hills has a similar styled collection covering the 2013 ice storm, which Sara will speak about shortly. Each of our libraries has existing digital collections excuse me, using Vita, so we are familiar with managing the toolkit, creating and editing records. In early April, setup began, which took very little time. The easy to follow instructions available in the Vita online manual, but for those who are not tech savvy, assistance was provided via email by the very patient ODW personnel, to whom I would like to extend a very hearty thank you. At Newmarket, it took about 2 weeks from receipt of email, management approval, to the first photograph submission. Once the contribution model was set up, it was very easy to manage. Links for our new collections were added to the digital collections pages. Then the links to the contribution portal were added to the library websites and to COVID-19 library information pages. Marketing and publicity was also being crafted. We each created the text for the contribution portal to explain to our users the purpose of the archive and the terms of use. This public portal is where people upload their contribution, add any description, and if they wish, to make their name public or remain anonymous. Early entries, and some by staff, uploaded to test the new module and to begin collection building. By the end of April, beginning of May, we were ready to send out our publicity and advertise on social media, inviting submissions. Sara will now speak about the Ice Storm collection.
Thank you. I'm Sara from the Halton Hills Public Library. And at the Halton Hills Library, we did something similar with the local 2013 ice storm. For this project, we did not use the Vita contribution module. Instead, we pulled pictures from Facebook and uploaded them ourselves. This made it a much more time-consuming project for the staff member creating the exhibit, and it also limited the number of pictures that we included. So we were very interested in using the Vita contribution module for this community collection project. And after the initial setup, we thought that it would require very little staff time to maintain and approve the contributions. But more on that later. For now, I'm going to speak about some of the publicity and outreach strategies that all three of our libraries used. So when we first started the contribution collections, we worked with our library's marketing and communication specialists to try and advertise this initiative as widely as possible. This included an article in our local newspapers and posts on the library's various social media outlets. And of course, information about the initiative was shared on our library's websites and sent out to library patrons through our regular email newsletters. We also communicated this initiative to library staff, and a lot of the initial contributions were from library staff members, which really helped to get the collection started. This initial outreach happened when we first started the project back in April and beginning of May 2020. All three of our libraries did a second wave of outreach in the fall to try and renew interest in participating. Besides all of the publicity and outreach strategies that Halton Hills, Newmarket, and Kawartha Lakes shared, we also did different targeted outreach. At Halton Hills Public Library, we focused our targeted outreach to other town departments and library partners. We sent personalized emails to our local BIAs and the Parks and Recreation Department, among many others. And I will speak to how this outreach was received during the user uptake section of our presentation. And now Angele will talk about her experience reaching out to a local historical society and a photographer.
Thank you. My first thought was to contact the local historical society with an idea to form a partnership to share contributions. I submitted an article for their monthly newsletter, hoping members would be interested in contributing. As it turns out, they are also gathering materials for their own archive. My next contact was a local photographer who works with a local online news source, where he had published some photographs of the effects of the pandemic around Newmarket. After I had emailed him with the information about the library's archive and with links for him to check out the submissions, he replied that he had concerns about piracy and, as a professional photographer, concerns about showing his work alongside work of lower quality. Also, as it turns out, he has plans to contribute to the Historical Society's archive. And after he looked at the submissions for our archive, he indicated, "It's not for me." And now Shawnee will speak about working with city archivists and chambers of commerce.
Hi, I'm Shawnee from the Kawartha Lakes Public Library. And for us, for me anyway, I approached the city archivist who was new to our city team, and together we contacted the local chambers of commerce to share a call for submissions from their members. So we were looking for signage, for information about their business and how they were managing. And we received a handful of responses from those businesses. These were sent directly to us via email, though rather than submitting through the contribution portal, it was just turned out to be easier that way. And now I will take us through user uptake and engagement. So we've set up our contribution modules, the collections were ready to grow. Let's talk about how they engaged with us. Remember all the signs? At the beginning of the pandemic, many of the public contributions that came in were signs in Halton Hills and Newmarket. Staff and the public in April and May sent in a few photographs, or a fair few anyway, of them working from home, children in online school, places, and random distanced events in our communities. But this tapered off as we moved into the summer and the novelty of COVID and living in the global pandemic faded. Citizens in Newmarket and Halton Hills were more interested in contributing, with approximately 75 items donated in Newmarket, just under 100 in Halton Hills, and unfortunately only about 30 or less public contributions in Kawartha Lakes. So by the summer, contributions to Newmarket's archive had slowed, with staff submitting the occasional photo or two. And though another call for submissions was sent out in October, as previously mentioned, there was no extra uptake. A couple of staff members have kept the archive alive with their contributions, and then of those that contributed, most provided descriptions, dates, and locations of their submissions. Angele then added Library of Congress subject headings or thesaurus subject headings and searchable terms to those descriptions for better searchability, remaining consistent throughout with her choices in the description fields to connect local newspaper articles with images in the archive. In Halton Hills, Sara had staff and community members contribute as well. Again, another case of early interest that waned as time went on, as the public moved from a sense of community togetherness to fatigue over it all. She reached out to library partners and other town departments and received contributions from these groups. And Sara will speak more on this shortly. As I mentioned earlier, uptake in Kawartha Lakes was sporadic. While publicized through both media and social media, little was shared with us from the public. Our collection was populated internally by collecting articles and videos from local media sources, including public social media posts. We didn't take private ones or ones that were friends of friends or anything like that. It just didn't seem right. Two examples are on the slide, one of which is a local news source providing their daily COVID numbers update, and the hashtag Jump in a Lake Challenge fundraising event for a community food bank. And now over to Sara to talk about Halton Hills contributions.
So Halton Hills received the most contributions from our targeted outreach through email, and sometimes more than one email was needed. And we sent these to other town departments and library partners. We recognize that everyone has a lot on their plates, so in these emails, we said they could just send us the photographs and we would take care of the rest. Now, this did lead to our biggest uptake in contributions. We received over 60 submissions this way from this type of outreach. But this also meant that I had to spend a lot more time on our end uploading these photographs and finding the basic information such as when and where. So while we initially thought this project would require very little of my time, since approving user contributions in Vita is very quick and easy, we did end up investing more time in order to grow and enhance the collection. But something that we have done a bit differently than Newmarket and Kawartha Lakes is that we have not added in additional metadata such as subject headings to the records. This decision was made largely because of staff time. And as everyone does, we had to balance our current time versus future needs. We are hoping to go back and add in some newspaper articles to help contextualize all of the photographs in order for our collection as a whole to be more useful for researchers in the future. And next, it's going back to Shawnee, who's going to speak about some of the obstacles that we all shared.
Thanks, Sara. So broken down, we had a lot of similarities in obstacles to growing our COVID collections, and these had 4 major topics that it covered. So our first one was competition. So Angele had mentioned this with the photographer. One thing we discovered is we were all competing with multiple interests searching for the same resources. We had local history groups or the city itself who set up their own COVID collections and wanted to keep a lot of their collections in-house, so they weren't too keen on sharing with us. We had the local news who put out calls for the public to share their funniest masks, and the sense of prestige of being seen in the paper was a strong motivator to share with them instead. We also fought with the public's desire to share with their personal social media platforms, which would give them more attention and likes than any of our archives, unfortunately. Additionally, as Sara mentioned, there was the competition of time. Our libraries were running other programs which required staff time, and our promotion platforms needed to provide time and space to share those other programs. The COVID archives experienced a decrease in patron attendance because it was not in front of the people as often, though we did try very hard, and returning staff were being allocated to other more current needs, such as programming and events. This time crunch also meant taking a different approach to processing contributions. Sara mentioned that earlier as well. This included either setting aside, adding additional metadata for enhanced searching, which would have made the collections items public and more visible, but they are still there and people can browse them, or uploading all of the collection pieces thus far, but not making them immediately public until we could be properly compiled with metadata, such as I've done in Kawartha Lakes. The second category was using technology. So Angele mentioned a little thing here as well. Despite what the images on the slide might make you believe, there was an unwillingness or inability to submit contributions using the Vita module. In Newmarket, Angele noted that people were easily frustrated if the process was too slow or if there was a momentary glitch, and would then email their contribution instead. For Kawartha Lakes, we have the added issue of being a mostly rural city with pockets of highly limited broadband access, people reliant on their cell phone data, or having no connectivity whatsoever. Another detail that we noted was that the Vita contribution module is limited to images and typed text stories only. This did not allow for video or audio recordings, with video being especially popular with smartphone users. Repetition. Closed signs, painted rocks, thank you signs. There was a lot of repetition in what was being contributed to the collection. Nothing was refused, but it made for a very repetitive viewing. Gathering newspaper clippings and online articles is a good way to bolster the collection, break up repetition, and provide more storytelling around those community contributions. And finally, fatigue. Simply put, the public grew tired of hearing about COVID. The feeling of community togetherness began to fade as we moved out of summer and into those big time family holidays like Thanksgiving without an end to the pandemic in sight. And contributions also dropped as a result starting in the summer. Mentioned multiple times, but it's relevant. And as the only people working on our COVID collections, we were getting tired and probably burnt out too. It's a lot of bad news. We promoted, reshared, and reminded our communities that we are here, but when a community does not want to engage with you, it is disheartening, even when the reasons why are understandable. Now over to Sara to speak about planning for the future.
So we are trying to think and plan ahead, even though 2020 emphasized how quickly we may have to change those plans. We are all still accepting submissions. However, we have not done further outreach since the second round of publicity in the fall. We have all discussed having our COVID-19 digital history contributions as an ongoing collection on our respective Vita Digital Archives websites. At Halton Hills, it was our initial plan to turn the submissions into an online exhibit using the Vita exhibit module at the end of 2020. However, we have adjusted these plans since we initially made them back in April, since we are still very much in the thick of the pandemic. We may start to create the exhibit with the idea that it will be an evolving one as we hopefully get more submissions still, and as the history we are currently living continues to evolve and change. Now, this contribution project did remind us of other things we can do with the Vita Digital Toolkit, and it led to some new skills and ideas. One example here is the Henry Thomas Shepherd exhibit, which tells the life story of a local Georgetown resident, volunteer, and veteran. We worked closely with the Shepherd family to gather photographs and the family history, and then I created the digital exhibit using the Vita Toolkit. And finally, we are all hopeful for the future. Among all the closure signs, empty grocery shelves, and negative news articles, there were many photographs and stories shared of hope, connection, and community spirit. We saw countless thank you signs and painted rocks. There were pictures of toilet paper being back in stock. People learned new hobbies, such as creating balloon bouquets to share with others, and community members held fundraisers and decorated their windows and garage doors and lawns with hope and positivity. And Newmarket's first contribution of 2021 is of the local vaccination center. Angele?
I'm still asking for and receiving the occasional submission. The vaccination center submission was from the hospital. They agreed to allow us to use it for our archive. At some point, I hope to possibly move the link to be part of the main collection page. Right now, it's hard to look beyond what's happening in our communities with lockdown and hoping and waiting for the big contribution with the headline, "The pandemic is over."
Along with the exhibit module that Sara mentioned, the new Vita Toolkit timeline feature allows us to then map collections on a visual timeline, which can provide context and a sense of the arc of the pandemic events. Just reviewing the early contributions of empty parking lots and closed businesses is a reminder of how stringent the early lockdown was and how our communities responded to that. And then we start to see the arc grow with the slow reopening. We see the celebration of simple pleasures and socializing from a distance, of course. Throughout, the world has been coping in different ways with art and music projects, fake news, calling it out or propagating it, virtual events, new protocols in how we interact with each other and places. The news of a vaccine and its distribution does feel like the end of the arc, but this is dampened by continued infections, mutations, holiday and travel restrictions, and so on, and it's not over yet. We're still tracking the evolution of the virus and its effect on our communities, and we hope people will also continue to track these effects on their households and share their experiences with future generations and researchers. As with any history, the COVID collections did not necessarily represent the full spectrum of society, and Angele, Shawnee, and Sara have all mentioned components of this. There is an absence of contributions from or about anti-maskers, for example, and some of the protests that happened around that, or the events surrounding the BLM movement in the States, as well as the election and inauguration upheavals that we've just seen and how that ties in with the pandemic, as well as on other events of social unrest that occurred during the pandemic and are continuing to occur. These are obviously newsworthy items that were added to some of the collections only by carefully curating and a lot of extra work for the local history librarians. Needless to say, the contributions from the community will add valuable anecdotal information that can be discovered by future researchers and build the timeline of local history into the recent past. Librarians and other groups were launched into new activities to match circumstances, including inviting community contributions instead of and on top of their regular tasks of managing and circulating existing collections in a very different environment. And these new activities and circumstances also mean that people, both at the participating organizations and at home, have learned new skills, and the results show us a way of seeing new opportunities and strengths in our communities. So therein lies the end of our presentation, when I'd like to invite you to raise your questions to us as a group or to a specific speaker in the Q&A module at this time. Also, here are our names and contact information if you'd like to follow up with any one of us. The Vita sites that we've mentioned are also on the last slide, so you can visit them and explore the collections at your leisure. And I'll just mention that OurDigitalWorld is also here with a virtual booth, and there's also a Vita Toolkit booth as well. So please feel free to come by the virtual marketplace exhibit hall and chat with one of our team if you're interested in learning more. And I want to thank everyone for attending, and to our speakers for covering off what has been a very long process, but also your endurance in creating these collections over time and helping us keep track of our history. So thank you very much.